More on this now with our editor-at-large, Craig Peters, who's in London today. And joining me from Atlanta, Georgia, is Jeffrey Tucker. He's the Editorial Director of the American Institute for Economic Research. Jeffrey, Craig, welcome to you both. Jeffrey, I'd like to start with you, if I may. In the last hour or so, Trump has said that he may make a deal at some point with China. Is he serious, do you think?
I don't think so. I've been predicting this for 3 years, that Trump desperately wants a tariff-based economic nationalism, and he's targeted China in particular, and it's all come true. And at this point, it's getting crazy. In 2017, we saw, some substantial corporate tax relief, which is large part, I would say, that and the deregulation responsible for the good performance of the U.S. economy. But now, with $120 billion in tariff revenue expected, at least that's what's anticipated from these new round of tariffs, the tax cuts are being actually swamped. I mean, my colleague Max Gulker actually ran the numbers just this morning. And what do you know? The tax cut from last year doesn't even exist in light of all these tariffs. These are terrible for American corporations, and you can see right now American companies are desperately trying to get everything out of China as soon as possible because they're anticipating it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. Yeah, so this is going to be very bad.
Someone else who's pretty bearish on all this is Jack Ma. He thinks that these trade frictions could last another 2 decades. What do you think of that?
I actually doubt that. I saw that prediction too, and I actually think that what you have to remember about this entire policy is that this is a policy of 2, 3, maybe 4 guys. I mean, it's actually an incredible thing. The entire corporate commercial class in America is against this. The consumers are going to be punished. The Chamber of Commerce is against it. The U.S. auto industry is begging for relief. Nobody's for this except for a handful of people driven by a wild economic nationalist ideology. And so I think if they actually get out of power, then we're going to see a restoration of the progress towards free trade that we've seen since the end of the Second World War. I
want to get back to what's happening in the White House in a little bit, if I may. But Craig, I want to bring you in. Look, we know the time horizons of how the Trump administration and the U.S. government work, and the difference between the time horizons of the Chinese government, which is much, much longer term. How does all of that play into what we're seeing right now?
Look, tariffs are a tax on consumers. That's evident, but that's not what's going on here. $200 billion in tariffs on Chinese goods. So what? China can't match that. China doesn't import enough from the U.S. to target $200 billion. The dollar-for-dollar retaliation only works up to $60 billion. Of course, does it make any sense? Well, probably not. But this is not what's in the Trump playbook. What can the Chinese do? Invisible retaliation, skunk works, what? Closing factories or some sort of patriotic consumer boycotts? Well, that's a no-go because it's going to eliminate jobs in China. It's going to damage Xi's reputation. So what are they going to do? What else? Oh, let's weaken the yuan further against the U.S. dollar. Trump is going, please, please, President Xi, do that, because that's going to make China's imports more expensive. It's going to percolate inflation. It's going to engender capital flight. This is a war going on here, a war of attrition, and there's more at stake here, as Trump sees it, than just some U.S. jobs.
Right. Craig, you make it sound like China doesn't have all that many options, but it probably does have a couple. I mean, for example, one of the things that got dropped from the list of goods that were being tariffed are rare earth elements. Now, these are crucial in semiconductors, in all sorts of high-tech equipment. And those were dropped at the last minute by the Trump administration. China has warned that it could actually restrict the exports of those elements, and China has a lot of those rare earths. Could that just be one of the many non-trade ways in which China could hit back at the U.S.?
I think that's a hollow threat, as hollow as the Chinese saying they're not going to buy any more U.S. debt. Look, China has a lot more on the table here, and which is why they don't want to buckle. If if they buckle under this to Trump, who's basically looking for, you know, intellectual property theft. He wants the Chinese government to stop subsidizing state industries. But there's other things here. Other critics are going to get involved. You're going to have the environmentalists coming in and saying, hey, listen, you've been destroying the coral reefs off China. Stop that. Oh, and what about those Muslim Chinese citizens you're putting into re-education camps in China? Well, we're going to bring that to an issue here. The Communist Party needs to stay tough here, and this is why I think Jack Ma has come out and said, oh, it's going to last another 20 or 30 years.
Okay, Jeffrey, let me bring you back in. What do you think? How can China retaliate? I mean, Craig makes a very good point that given the deficit, the trade deficit, China may have to resort to other measures.
I think it's exactly right. Look, if I were the Chinese government, you know what I would do? Absolutely nothing. I would be a complete pacifist and not retaliate at all, because it's actually going to hurt their own consumers and drive investment capital away from China. I think you do absolutely nothing. You let Trump win, because you notice that Trump's excuses for all this stuff keeps mutating, right? It's the trade deficit one day, intellectual property. It's the fact that China subsidizes industries, and I'm sure that's right. And next thing you know, it's going to be the treatment of the Muslim citizens. It's always going to be something new, because this is a policy that Trump wants, completely independent of China's domestic policy. Trump is a believer in tariffs. He always has been. And and he actually believes in his heart of heart that this is what's causing the U.S. economy to grow right now, is that everybody's celebrating the tariffs. This is despite all evidence. You know, the markets are responding negatively towards this. He's surrounded by thousands of lobbyists begging him not to keep doing this, but he's determined and he's dogged and he's going ahead.
Yeah, is there a possibility? Sorry, Craig, go ahead.
No, there's another issue here, as Trump sees this as a counterattack to One Belt, One Road. That's what I've been hearing from his advisors since July privately. They don't like One Belt, One Road. They see this as a manner of stopping it in its tracks, or at least curtailing it. That's their belief. You can believe it or not.
I don't know. I'm very devastated. My friend Larry Kudlow, who I've known for 30 years, is a real free trader, you know, and he keeps making these excuses for Trump, acting as if this is all a tactic. And I just really, I don't believe that, actually. I think Trump's an old-style Hamiltonian who believes in internal improvements and high tariffs, and he thinks that's the way you're going to win. And he goes after China because, true mercantilist, and he's going after China because China's the second biggest or the first biggest economy in the world, however you want to render it. So he sees them as the competition that we have to crush and get less dependent upon. Now, American businesses don't agree, right? We had, I think, pretty good trade relations a couple of years ago, and things were going on swimmingly. Okay, but now everything's been blown up.
Jeffrey, I'm glad you brought Larry Kudlow up, because it does bring into question what might be happening in the White House. Does this confirm some of these deep divisions that we're hearing about between the hawks on the one hand and the doves on the other? You've got Robert Lighthizer, Peter Navarro on the one hand, who have been pushing for a very hard line on China, and then you've got Mnuchin and Larry Kudlow on the other. In this latest round, who do you think won out?
Well, it's always going to be the hawks that win. In fact, the doves get shoved to the other end of the White House. You remember what happened to Gary Cohn? He resigned over this stuff, and I thought that was, by the way, a very, very principled action, actually. I mean, I was cheering that on. On the other hand, Larry Kudlow looked at that situation and said, thanks a lot, Mr. Cohn. Now you can't be a good influence on Trump. Now you just are completely out of the picture. I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to have the biggest influence I have. But Trump only wants to hear one kind of advice, which is raise the tariff, more trade war.
Well, that's all very true. But at the same time, in the Pentagon, there are whole new rings over there who are telling the White House that the future of conflict is going to be on the business and economic battlefield. And this is part of the equation. Perhaps not a big part of it in Trump's mind, but it is on the table, and I think that is an accurate military economic assessment.
We have 15 seconds left. Jeffrey, final word to you. Do you see the US and China sitting around a table to talk trade in the next 3 months?
I think the Chinese have decided that this is a waste of their time, so I think that they're walking away from this because it's not actually achieving anything. You know what's really disturbing to me? Americans do not understand tariffs. People in this country actually believe that China is paying tariffs. Right. That's not true. Americans are paying the tariffs. And how we're going to fix that situation, I don't know.
Right. Very quickly, yes or no, Craig, trade negotiations between the US and China very soon?
I have absolutely no idea, but nothing until after the midterms.
Gotcha. Craig Peters, Jeffrey Tucker, thank you both very much indeed.